And we are on. This is the fourth episode of PodBN COVID edition. We're going to be talking to Pastor Dave Glesne, the senior pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Bloomington. Thanks for, which also happens to be my church. So thanks for getting on today to talk, Pastor Dave. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So St. John's is quite a large church with a lot going on, and it's been interesting for me as a parishioner to see how things have adapted and changed to try to keep things going on my side. But I know you've got a lot wider view of it. So can you just talk a little bit about, I guess maybe just starting like when this was all kind of heating up, what was on your mind and what you were thinking, and then how things have progressed since then?
Yep. So, I think probably my initial memory as I look back a little while was coming in on Monday after school was initially, the announcement had been made, and everybody on staff kind of looking at me going, well, now what do we do? And I'm like, I don't know. I've never lived in a pandemic before. And so over the course of a couple of days, we immediately began switching gears. We had already started to procure sanitizer for all the pews, and we're talking about sitting in different ways and doing different things. And we had worship then that following weekend. That was a little different. Excuse me. And then kind of got to the point where
I remember making some adjustments. I was a greeter during that service, so there were some adjustments, like we weren't shaking hands, and we weren't passing the communion plate, and some things like that. Yeah.
And so we were trying to make some good changes on the fly, and then the no groups larger than 10 kind of mandate came down, and well, fortunately we have more than 10. Unfortunately, we have more than 10, so we weren't able to gather in the way that we normally do on the weekends, nor even for that point, our preschool is also a very large part of our operation at St. John. So that too, we had some concerns about how that was going to happen and things that were going to go on with that. And you have, and that's just from an operational standpoint. Here's our normal rhythm of life, and our normal rhythm of life does not remote well, generally speaking, the way that we've done it in the past. So we had to start doing some very creative thinking really, really fast once we figured out we wouldn't be able to be together in worship. So we immediately, I'm very fortunate in the fact that we've got a great staff and some wonderful volunteers at St. John's that are creative and kind of go with the flow and have kind of picked up the ball and run with different aspects of how we've had to adapt to the stay-at-home or the safer-at-home situation. So that began pretty much the second week. We tried pulling off worship as we normally do, but just by ourselves. And that worked okay. But I thought, we can do this better. We have some folks who have some skills. And
so by that, you mean you were you were just videotaping the parts of the service and having the people who normally deliver them, kind of splicing them together online with, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and for the most part, we had for contemporary service, we still had our contemporary worship team, up on stage and spaced them apart, and it looked a little goofy, but they still made, a joyful sound, so that's cool. And then we just kind of recorded the individual pieces, parts of worship that way. And over the time, with some other things that kind of came in with newer guidelines, we decided that we didn't even want to bring people that close together again, because we had the means via technology to put together a worship experience that would be meaningful and fulfilling and wouldn't necessarily have to put anybody at risk for coming in or having too much contact with others. So that worked out pretty well over the last couple of weeks, and we've been sharpening up that. Easter was the weirdest one, not to be able to be gathered for worship on Easter for me was really odd.
Yeah.
But the numbers are pretty good. I mean, it's, the folks are engaging, people are adapting to this new way. And there was what I've been really thrilled with, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, is one of the things that we launched right away when we knew that those folks 70 and above were at the greatest risk for deleterious things happening if they caught this virus. So they should really not get out. We really put a focus on trying to connect with those numbers of our congregation in that particular demographic. So we sent out letters and did phone calls and made a lot of connections and just touched base with a lot of folks that way. We started a separate ministry called Caring Connections. We've already done similar things, so we had some patterns to follow there, but we have just a tremendous amount of folks who stepped up to make it, got a little list of folks who they, how many did they feel comfortable with. And so anywhere from 1 to a dozen, depending on who you are and how extroverted you are and want to contact other people, that gave people an opportunity to build community and to touch base with folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that Easter one was really, was very, very weird. For us, that was one of the. I feel like this for me is like it goes in waves. Like 90% of the time, I'm fine. Like I don't feel like anything's wrong, and then there's just like that 10% of the time where it hits me. Whether I notice it most at work, where suddenly I find myself really like irritated or fixated on one thing, and I'm like, why is this email the thing that's making me like angry today? Like, and there's nothing really that different. It's just that's the thing that flicked that switch for me. And I'd say as far as like things that I'm involved in the community, on the whole, it's been that way too. But man, that Easter service, it just really like it hit me deep how much things have changed and how odd this whole experience is, because it's just a time when we all are together, right? You're trying to fight for a place in the pew. So
yeah. And the thing is, and that's something I've kind of, I don't know, the rebel in me has kind of gone down this road a little bit, is a lot of folks refer to this as the new normal. I'm like, this ain't, first of all, new. If you're a history student, for plagues, things happen, this is whatever. Mm-hmm. So, but it's certainly not normal in any way, shape, or form. Now, will it affect what will happen in our lives going forward? Absolutely will. And my hope is that in some ways it'll be a very positive turnout. Again, I go back to the connections that we're able to make. Sometimes you take those connections you have with other human beings for granted, and those people who are on the extroverted, huggy side, I don't think they will quite ever live life the same way. They may savor those things a little more going forward. But I think as a community, we started to realize how much we do just appreciate being able to gather together and what a gift that actually is. When for some folks, growing up, I had the talk from my folks as well. And I'm sure other folks have had this similar experience where, I grew up, my dad was a pastor and I didn't want to go to church every single week. And, we had the conversation where, my dad turned to me and says, no, you get to go to church every week. I'm like, that makes no sense to me. Now that makes sense to me.
Yeah. You take something like that away. Yeah. I thought about that too. Not growing up in the church, about how it's like, well, I'm there are people, and it's not to disrespect them. I know some very good people who don't feel corporate worship is important for them. But man, once and if someone said to me like, hey, how important is it, like this building that you go to with all these people, how important is that? I would have said like, I like it, but it's not like the, a core thing. But man, taking it away and seeing the impact it's had on my life, to not be able to have just easy fellowship and conversation with people, to shake hands in the morning, to have the kids be with their friends in Sunday school, to wave to people, to take communion physically. I mean, it's been more, I guess to put it positively, it's really emphasizes the positives of that whole experience and why we get to do it on Sundays, right?
Yeah. It'll be very interesting. A lot of different conversations from different folks, about what they valued or what they missed, and I've gotten a good number of notes from folks. What's really nice is, I think, going back from a historical perspective, this is perhaps the first non-isolated isolation, if that makes sense, mm-hmm. because we have the technology, with the Spanish flu, that wasn't quite the same. Technology wasn't where it is now with that kind of stuff. And so we have, the ability, not only phone calls, not only mail and writing, but, we can do stuff like this.
Doing
I
this,
mean, the number
yeah.
of times, we do, even on staff, it's been a kind of a blessing. One of the silver linings I think I found on that is we do a daily touch base on Zoom. And what's really nice is the meetings don't tend to drag on because nobody likes a long meeting, but we're able to touch base and people are able to see people they know every single day doing somewhat normal things, because we've been very blessed in the fact that we're able to keep everybody on board working and doing stuff. Now, it may not be the normal stuff they would be doing if they were inside the building, but we're able to transpose enough of what we do that everybody's able to do that. And honestly, we're also fortunate in the fact that a major portion of our ongoing operating expenses come through gifts of offerings, and a vast majority of us now do electronic giving. And so I don't have to show up. It just comes right out of my bank account. And other folks have seen the fact that this is the kind of time when greater needs arise, and they've been very generous with us. So we've been able to keep people up to speed, working and doing things. The physical plant, those folks who are responsible for that, by the time when you get back to the church, it's going to smell and look wonderful, because they've been taking care of a lot of deferred maintenance, everything from cleaning the carpets to polishing the floors and other little things that sometimes get left to the wayside because life gets so busy. And it's a pretty good sized building, as you know, so it takes some time. So we've been able to keep them pretty well occupied.
Yeah.
So,
and for anyone listening who doesn't know where St. John's is, it's on Towanda, by Ewing Manor, and by where the old post office used to be there. So it's a very large campus, large building, in there, including like you mentioned, Dave, the preschool that's in there too, and full commercial kitchen and all this. Definitely two different worship spaces and things, or three, I guess, if you count the fellowship hall. So yeah, definitely a large place. So I know that the finances and the business side of the organization isn't directly your responsibility, but I mean, I'm sure it's on your mind too. So, the church is also a small business with the running staff and things like that. So, I guess I don't need to pry too much, but what I'm hearing from you is you haven't needed to furlough anyone, and you're still getting people are still being able to give and keep everything running as we had set up.
Yep. It's not going to last forever, but the hope is we were in a pretty healthy place financially when we closed out last year. If there's a time of year where financially we have a little bit more wiggle room than we tend to do at any other point in time, it's sort of this time of the year. So we're able to do that. Now, can we do this indefinitely? Of course, nobody can, but especially without changing the model of what you do. But I think at this point in time, everybody's been able to keep at that, and that's been a huge blessing, because one of the things I hate to do, and I've had to do this a couple of times for budgetary reasons, for less than glamorous reasons, is you have to let somebody go or tell them they don't get the hours they needed, and that's about my least favorite thing to do in the entire world. And so I've been very fortunate, and my true hope and prayer is that, because that's where I think a lot of folks right now, as I look out in the broader world, where people are getting really angsty about this, is I think on some of that is on that financial level. How the bill is going to get paid, how's the all that kind of stuff, and those are tough questions. Those are real life things you got to wrestle with. But it's both from a spiritual perspective, how does one wrestle with this? What is the point of going through all this stuff mean? And so hopefully a lot of the stuff that we're also doing on a daily basis, each member of the program staff, we've got some highly talented, wonderfully gifted folks who write a daily blessing that goes out to our members each and every day, that kind of just does some reflection on what, some of it's been reflecting on if you have time on your hands and you're bored, what can you do? What does this mean? How do you turn this into a positive sort of a situation, or at least a situation that will benefit you on some levels? And so there's been some really good connection there, some spiritual connections, some practical suggestions as well from some of the staff. We're reaching out technologically in different ways as well to do that, not just via email, but we're also still using some of our older methods because there are some folks in our congregations who are, I won't call them Luddites, but they're not technical in their skills. And I say that because they're not all the older people. We've got a couple of folks who are in their 90s, God bless their heart, that are all over Facebook like white on rice. They are just everything. They know every little detail about it. I mean, there's this 93-year-old lady who sends me memes. I'm like, this woman has got a meme game. For 93 years old, it's absolutely spectacular. But some folks just don't do technology. So we still have to send letters. We still have to make sure that they're connected. Some of those folks don't like to chat on the phone so very much, and they're not so sure what they need. So how do you connect with them gently? So sometimes a letter or a note is the best way to do that with folks. So we're using older technologies and newer things to help address those people. Some of it's going to be financial. One of the things I'm working with some other community organizations, we're kind of gearing up for what's next. Lord willing, whenever anything does happen to open back up again and life, quote unquote, gets back to normal, there are always, and I've been around long enough, and you probably have too, is no matter how much we try, there's always people fall through the gaps. Always people fall through the net. Even in a great safety net, there's always going to be somebody that finds that one spot. And working through various other community organizations, the townships and some other folks, we're trying to put together a comprehensive way to keep as many of those people from falling through into homelessness and some of the other struggles that will happen after that if they don't get the assistance that's needed immediately. There's a lot of programs that are out there. They'll catch a lot of folks. That's the hope. But there's always those folks that are the outliers that have unique circumstances, the thing that doesn't fall into a normal government program. How do you address those real human needs with folks? So we began that conversation already this past week, which I think is good because that's going to start coming our way here before we know it.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. That was actually one of the things I was curious about. Being one of the largest churches in the area, we have a lot of ability to be aware of the needs and also to try to help people with them. So you are seeing groups, secular, religious, and government. They're coming together. They're talking. They're trying to patch up the gaps in the nets there. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
And it's kind of nice because as a church, we're a little bit more, which is not normally the case. Sometimes the church can be a bureaucracy and have some stuff that we struggle with occasionally. But in this particular case, compared to the government, we're much more nimble and able to react more quickly to some kinds of needs. So I'm hoping that if that is, and I believe it will be, a need that arises, that we'll be able to address it and be a positive force in that regard.
Yeah. So we talked about worship a little bit, talked about ministry, talked a little bit about community. Kind of wanted to dwell a little bit more on the community aspect of it. What has this experience had you thinking about as far as what a community is and like what constitutes community? It's sort of challenged our traditional notions, right? Because community is usually like, oh, you're together, right? So when we're not together, what does that still mean, especially in a season like Easter?
So some of that is that connective tissue that's there. So how do you form those connections? How does a community forms not just because of locale, although that's certainly part of the recipe. But I think in this particular case with the church, one of the common things that we have is that, we are, in this particular case, members of St. John's, but we also have connections beyond that. So one of the things that I'm seeing is that people who are part of our community already, that were pre-established there, are reaching out to others who have needs and say, you may want to check out what we're doing at our church. You may find it helpful, whether that's online worship, whether that's some of the other things that we do through St. John's and some of our ministries. well, a nice for instance that I liked that happened was shortly after this all started to happen, Luther Oaks down there needed those folks weren't allowed to. Yeah, the care facility, nursing home, assisted living. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And so a lot of them, they're independent living. Well, you can't be independent when you're locked into your place. And if you are really high risk, you really oughtn't leave. And that is their kind of suggestion for their folks. And most of them, I believe, are abiding by those rules to maintain the safety of their community there. But they still got to eat. They still have to do these, who's going to run their errands for them, get their medicines, do all this kind of stuff. So they have some of that stuff built in the community out there already. And one of the people that does that is Marvin Roush, who's a member of St. John's. And he called us up and said, we're going to need some folks to help do some grocery shopping. Do you think we could whip together a crew that could do that? So on a weekly basis, I think it is now, we get about 20 or so folks. And they head out to, they've got an arrangement with Hy-Vee, and they head out to Hy-Vee first thing in the morning during those early morning hours that they have for some folks. And they go through and they get the groceries for folks. They put them in the van. They all get delivered out to Luther Oaks. They sit in a quarantine area for a couple of days, and then those things are delivered to the residents out there as they have ordered them. So it's one of those ways where, you don't need a degree in rocket science to go grocery shopping, but you do need to have a healthy enough so you're not putting yourself at risk. So you're able to do this very small thing that somebody who's in their 80s or 90s can't do without placing a high level of risk on their life. So that's one of those really cool ways that you bind together. So we're doing things for people we've never met before, but they're able to live more abundantly in their community. We grow because we get to see, even at 6 feet distance, a bunch of other people that either we've gone to church with or are part of our community. Because it's not just members of St. John's. We've drawn in other volunteers who feel that they want to do something positive along those lines too. So that's a real positive. That's one thing I can point to in that regard. Yeah. I think as far as the rest of the community of the church goes, I think that goes back to just having that conversation. I think using technology, one of the things that dawned on me, I'm not always the most original thinker in the world, but I'm more of like a jazz musician. So once I hear a good riff, I can go with it. And so one of the things I think we're going to look at doing is doing kind of a check-in via Zoom or another platform where people who just want to talk, who want to say hi to the pastor, say hi to each other, can have a community time together, to draw together, to have conversation, to listen to one each other. I mean, if somebody had grandbabies and they want to show pictures to somebody and they just can't where they're at, well, you can do that online. So we're trying to adapt in some ways that. And honestly, one of the things we're starting to do right now is preparing, again, for what's next. How do we come back together again in a healthy and a productive way, not forcing the issue, but following guidelines for the safety and well-being of all people. And so that's a conversation we began this last week. We're going to continue to talk about it. At the very beginning of this, I said this was a fluid situation when I addressed the congregation because I didn't have a lot of answers. I still don't. We've just been doing the best that we can with this. And it does. As soon as you sort of think you got something figured out, the ground shifts a little bit on you again. And so we're going to keep that stance for a while, but going towards the point that we'll be able to do something eventually. But how will what we've gone through affect what we're going to go do next? Yeah. And that's a big part of the conversation.
Yeah. Man, another thing that I like that we've done is get some Facebook groups together of different groups. There's a dad's group, a men's group, but most of us are dads of kids of similar age, and so we get together on Wednesdays. So instead, we got a Facebook group and had a happy hour set up so we can kind of share our similar experiences and concerns and things like that. And it's something that's so weird to me is the experiences of two different groups in my peer group are very, very different. I have people who, and basically it's if they don't have children or not, if they have children or not. And so my friends who don't have children, especially if they live by themselves, they've now been almost in solitary confinement for a month, and they're just dying to have interaction with people. They're like setting up these Zoom happy hours and like, hey, can we play some board games online and like do all these things? And then people like me who have little kids, especially with multiples, who have to do different e-learning activities when school's closed, and I'm still trying to work from here. I mean, we are just running ragged, and it's like every day I feel like a little bit more depleted, you know? Um, and so it's been hard to be. I think each side is finding the other side. Like the experience differs so much where one's like, I'm really bored, and the other one's like, oh my gosh, I need some downtime. Um, it's kind of like our community is a little fractured a little bit in that way with my peer group. But
Yep.
yeah, needs are differed, but you can kind of come together and support each other in different ways too, right? I'm
Yep.
hoping we can
Yep.
get to the point where where we're comfortable enough that we can have limited interaction where like my we have a really close friend who's like an aunt to my children, and I was like, and she's in Chicago in a condo by herself, getting driven up the wall, you know. And I was like, can she come here and help us take care of these kids? Like it would seem to meet everyone's needs. So hopefully we can take that step as some steps like that, you know. Um, anyway, the so I assume you're seeing that too from your perspective, that the needs and the experiences of different people in different groups are just so distinct.
And this is actually more just on a personal level. It's for me, it's actually been an obtuse amount of more work because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and I'm one of the people on staff that does technology. Unfortunately, most of my technology is getting a little older, so it takes a little longer to do certain tasks. So when we do all these works, we're trying to provide as many opportunities as possible and do all these things and be very, very creative. And while there's a certain energy that also goes along with that kind of meeting the need of the moment, there's also that time where it can exhaust you. And I think that's where you find yourself. And I think where parents with kids do the same thing, where they're doing what is needful. It's a good thing. It's a thing they have to do. And there are moments of great triumph in there. And there are also moments of just crushing, good Lord, what am I doing here? So it's really important to strike that balance, I think, in people's lives to say, where's your Sabbath? Going back to, to my major theme is, where do you find time for rest? And even as a pastor, one of my struggles is trying to get it, my normal rhythms have been thrown all out of whack. And I had learned to take care of myself pretty well within the course of these rhythms. And now that that's done, I found myself about 2 weeks ago just going, I am just exhausted. I mean, I started work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, granted, I'm doing it from my recliner with a cup of coffee and my 2 puppies on my lap, but I'm still doing this stuff. And I had one day where I had 7 Zoom meetings, in addition to the other stuff I needed to get accomplished that day. And, by 10 o'clock at night, I'm finally wrapping things up and I'm going, I don't know if I like this so much.
Yeah.
So
how are you
finding
finding that time for rest? Yeah. How are you finding that time?
So for myself personally, I'm just trying to find that new rhythm, and part of it is saying no to certain things that may be really cool ideas, but I just don't either have the time, the resources, the ability to do them at this point. We had actually some plans to do something a little different at Easter, and we started to be about 2 weeks out from Easter, 2 weeks into this, 2 weeks right before Easter, and I looked out over the horizon and went, that's going to be an absurd amount of work for I don't know what kind of return. I think there's a much smarter way to do this. So it goes back to one of my old mantras, is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And so you stood back and say, okay, I could do this, but what would be the result of it on the other side? And so I'm trying to establish that a little bit and take, to establish new rhythms. Now, the thing is, if everything goes right, by the time I get those new rhythms, we'll be able to change back to the old ones. But I think I can adapt to that too. So, but I think the key is to remind yourself that, this is not a normal thing. So I think a lot of folks, I see some stuff on social media and people, friends and congregational members and people who have never been, what's nice for me is I wasn't always a pastor, and the people I'm friends with haven't always known me as a pastor. So I get some people being very real with me. both as their pastor and as a friend. And I think a lot of them are just trying to do everything. And it's like, no, there has to be limits. You can try, but where do you find your space? Where do you find what's most important in this space? And I think for me, as a person of faith, one of the things that I need to do is spend a certain amount of time in prayer and reflection. And if I don't get that time for prayer, for reflection, I'm useless to everybody else. I get cranky, I get short. I'm not the happy pastor when it comes to those times. So I need to learn to take care of myself within that. So, in my schedule, I've been trying to do some more exercise. It was nice when it was nicer out. I got a lot more walks in, and everybody. It was nice because you got to see people even across the street.
Yes.
There are other human beings out there. It's fantastic. So I'm trying to take care of myself physically. I've been doing that. I got a little workout area downstairs here. I've been playing with those a little bit more too. But I haven't had a lot of time, and that's the thing where I've come. I've kind of seen this community input via social media saying a lot of people going, I'm bored, I'm running out of things to do. And I'm going, I wish I was. And I'm like, no, you're wishing, all right, now take the lesson. You need to take some time for yourself so that you're not, envious of people who have only time for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And people who have time for themselves, I think they have to look out saying, what can they do? There may not be a place that they can necessarily go, but there are those things, like I said, like running to go get groceries or helping people get medicines or, for me, one of the things that other thing that we do is we have people just contacting folks, phone calls, letters. When was the last time you wrote a letter to somebody, to do something proactive in your life to reach out to others and to form that sense of community that goes back and forth, not just one direction or not just all internal.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You ever find any time to play those guitars behind you at all?
Not enough. I need to do that more before this all hit anyway. But the other problem I had, though, is every once in a while, my downtime, this is how I got most of those, and we talked a little bit about this, is buy, sell, trade, you can find inexpensive, fairly nice musical instruments every once in a while, and that's how I got most of those. So I have to stop looking at that. Besides that, we're dealing with the same thing in our house. My wife's been furloughed, and my son, who still lives with us, is also if everything goes right, he'll start working from home on Monday. He's got to set up. We got him set up in a room upstairs so he can do tech support from home. And my wife,
you can't just be rocking out all the time with them here.
Yeah, exactly. There's business going on in this house. So. Yeah. But unfortunately for my wife, she has to put up with with me, who's probably busier than ever, and that places a different stress on different folks too. There are people who do that. So like I don't know what Susan's going through with all the monkeys or anybody else, other moms. I look at some of the moms online going, I was never meant to be a teacher. I was never meant to be a teacher.
Yeah. We thought about homeschooling, and we were like, no, I don't think that works for our kids' personalities. And I can definitively say that we were accurate in that assessment. It does not work for their personalities. We just keep saying to them, like, would you just not do your work for Mrs. X, your teacher? No. Okay. Then why is that okay for me? Like, why would you just say no when they gave you a worksheet? Anyway, it's just different personalities, different things.
Well, and I would have to think I think particularly your younger too, they tend to be much more extroverted from my observation. Mm-hmm. So not having people to engage with besides your siblings and your parents, that has to be tough too.
Yeah. Yeah, this is weird. So I'm an only child, and I got these 3 boys in here, and this interaction just keeps getting weirder to me because they'll spend like all day fighting with each other. Like, I'm so sick of you. Get out of my room. And then like we put them all to bed, and then I go downstairs to watch a show. I come up, and all 3 of them have gotten into the same bed and are all laying on top of each other. It's like I thought you hated each other. I don't get it, but that's what siblings do, I guess. So.
Yep. They get a lot of practice at forgiveness. They're.
Yeah. So hey, we kind of talked practically about what's going on too. I kind of wanted to talk sort of like spiritually too about like in particular if you're finding any biblical guidance, any more like if this is bringing additional insights to you for anything, or kind of passages or lessons that are coming to your mind more often in this situation.
One of the unique things that we did during the season of Lent in the church, which happens right before Easter, is it's a 40-day period of time where you kind of prepare for this big event that we're supposed to have celebrated together. And it's supposed to be this very intentional internal time of reflection, of penance, of giving and doing good works and that kind of stuff. It's got a very long history that goes throughout the church. And one of the things that we've done at St. John's and a lot of churches do is a series of intentional spiritual devotions and that kind of stuff. And I found the most ironic thing, I mean, it's nothing new to me necessarily, but it was just reintroduced back into my world, where I had, I was one of the authors of some of those devotions, and a lot of my colleagues were, and I read these devotions that we literally wrote right after Christmas. And the context then was so different from it is now, but the verses that were chosen and how the reflections came down just absolutely flabbergasted me as to how they impacted me on a day-to-day basis with this change in the way things occur. So going back through scripture again, so Easter, we talked about how weird Easter was. But here's the deal. I mean, if you go back to the very premise of Easter itself, it's weird. The premise of Easter, is death, is life from death. It doesn't work that way, and, those first witnesses of the resurrection, they come running back, and the women tell the dudes that, Jesus has risen, and the guys don't believe him because this just doesn't happen. And that kind of shock and emptiness, I mean, from even going through Holy Week, and we did our best to do Holy Week stuff as well, where you focus on, those events that brought Jesus to the cross, and just on some levels, they were more impactful than ever because it just resonated with a different way that my life had been. I wasn't on autopilot doing what I've always done before. I was really forced into looking into the deeper parts of the story and where those parts of the story align with my experience as a human being, and how I could see that being played out with others. And Easter being that kind of thing. So there was a meme amongst pastors during the last couple of weeks was, this is the lentiest Lent I've ever experienced, or I plan to give up a few things for Lent, but I wasn't quite thinking about giving up everything, So there's been that kind of impact. And I think, again, and this is one of the downsides sometimes as a person in my position, is sometimes you get so caught up in doing the busy work and making sure everybody else's needs are being met that you don't actually take time to do those things for yourself, which is why early days having that devotional practice and writing for me was really, really crucial. I think it helped me get through there, and it helped me look through the lens of scripture, whether that be the stories from the Old Testament of time of loss, of separation, anxiety, of lament. Here's the other thing, I think this time for a lot of folks, I don't think there's a lot of people that are having the time of their life right now. There might be a few introverts who are just as pleased as they can be, but they're not the kind of people to get giddy in the first place. But this is tough. You are abandoning a lot of good hopes, a lot of good dreams, a lot of good plans. There's uncertainty in the future. There's the threat of this disease itself coming in and altering your life and the life of someone you love forever. That's scary stuff. And there's a huge portion of scripture that speaks to the difficulty of life, whether that be the book of Job or the Psalms, through the Old Testament, even through the New Testament, the persecutions of the early church getting going. This is something that never dawned on me before, but after Jesus died, the disciples basically self-isolated, they self-quarantined for 50 days, essentially. They went out once or twice, but not very often. And they tended to keep close in amongst themselves, separated themselves, spent a lot of time in prayer and focusing on what did this new reality mean to them. And then they went out after that and figured out what this new normal was going forward. The new normal wasn't inside the house. The new normal was going out. So it's like, okay, maybe this is our time as a people of faith there, where we kind of concentrate on, all right, where does what I believe that God is up to in this world meet the road of real life? And how has this exit made me reflect on what I do and how I do it and how I might do it differently going forward. It kind of gives us that great baptismal refresh to say, I get to start again. I get to do again. Maybe I get to reset the table a little bit here because of things I took for granted are no longer things I want to take for granted. And I think in some way, as I've gone through my reflections through scripture, those have been some images and some thoughts that have come back and reinforced. But again, it's like any other discipline. It's like exercising. I still have to take time to do it because as a pastor, you can as you prepare a sermon every week. Well, that's not technically for you. Although sometimes I do learn and I grow a lot from that. I also still have to take care of the spirit that's inside of this dude. So that I can remain healthy enough to take care of others. And that's physically, spiritually, and mentally to do all those things. So I try to do a little bit every single day to kind of keep those areas balanced.
Yeah. Well, and that's something, again, as I mentioned, not growing up in the church, I kind of learned well, the Bible's like an old book. It's been translated a whole bunch. And, like these people think it's true, but then these other people think this other book is true. And these other people think, and just kind of throw it all in there. And if you try to actually read it anyway, it's pretty darn confusing, especially if you start at the beginning. It seems pretty, and why do you believe this and not like Greek mythology, but what I find so compelling about now that I am a Christian and I see the Bible, and it's, as you said, you can read a passage from it, you can read guidance from it, and it seems so applicable to your current situation, and then something knocks you off course like this, your world totally changes. You read that same thing again, it gives meaning in that situation as well, and it gives guidance for people like me who are extroverts with a bunch of little kids at home. It gives guidance for the introverts who are isolated at their homes. It's and there's definitely, it's not to exclude wisdom of other traditions too. There's definitely things to learn there. But as far as like, you can spend it's fascinating to me when you see things through different lenses and they still provide you with that wisdom and the guidance, how they do.
And I think as a people of faith too, to broaden this out quite a bit too, the thing is, I've been here for, it'll be 2 years in July. So I've gotten a kind of a feel for the community a little bit. And what's really nice is, I see in little ways, different congregations doing different things. Eastview has its thing that it does, our brothers and sisters over at Moses Montefiore, they have a certain mindset. So, even within with the Muslim community in town and other folks as well, that they are integrated into the point where they bring the best of what they have of faith for the good of others. And when that happens, you really do gel together as a community. Now, granted, I don't necessarily take the words of Quran to be scripture for me, but if it says something smart, I'm also smart enough to realize that you should probably think about that. But for me, the words of scripture for me and the way that I've seen that happen, time and time again, and that's been the remarkable thing for me as I've gone through this time, to say how much that resonates, that message that happens with the resurrection. And that's one of those things that gives me hope going forward, to say, that's why I kind of harp on that. This isn't the new normal. This is just weird.
Yeah. Well, and it's like situations that are foreign to us in the Bible. I mean, I was even thinking about plagues, right? It mentioned plagues there, and you're just like, okay, yeah, a bunch of people getting sick, oh, that sounds inconvenient. That would be a bummer if there was a plague, and now we're like, okay, this is a plague now, and look at the uncertainty, look at the turmoil, look at the death and the tragedy and everything, to really dwell on what that experience is of that line that we just breeze through or see in the Prince of Egypt Disney movie, oh yeah, they sent a plague, oh darn,
frog, yeah, whatever.
Next, and then you flip the page, right? But living through it, and I think seeing also that uncertainty, like you mentioned about the Easter story, as you were talking, I was reflecting on how I think we have this perception that as soon as Jesus came back, it was almost like the ending of an action movie, right? Where they catch the bad guy and everyone's like, hooray, everything's good now, let's all have a party and go Avengers, But even the people who directly saw him, not everyone was convinced. And so that Easter wasn't a whole bunch of people in a church singing the first Easter. It was much more like now, where you're separated from others who believe what you do, and kind of have to like have more time for contemplation and reflection on this. So it's been a very interesting season to dwell on and to consider those lessons. So yeah, especially what Pastor Ann talked about. It wasn't her sermon, but she talked about a sermon she heard of where the theme was, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming.
Yeah.
And to think about how when you're going through all these hard times, that like on Good Friday when Jesus died, like they didn't know for sure, they didn't know what was going to happen, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And just like right now, we just have to keep thinking Sunday's going to come here at some point for us. So yeah, well, good. Well, the last thing I just wanted to ask, if there was any sort of groups in town or people in town who you've seen to be really outside of, we talked about what St. John's is doing, but and then about what Luther Oaks is doing, but is there anyone else who you wanted to just give some recognition to, who you feel like's really been helping their community out a lot?
I think some of the groundwork that I've seen that has happened through United Way and working in partnership with a lot of the other organizations that are out there. I mean, one of the things I've been tickled with, to use an old phrase that my grandparents would use, about this community is the fact there isn't just one entity that seeks to help people in this community. There are lots of them. And the good news is, from what I've seen, is that they tend to play nicely together, which is also not always a given in this world. So I'm sure there's some issues with this, and there's personalities occasionally that do this. But what I've seen is, whether you have a group like PATH, or whether you have, a group with the Midwest Food Bank and all those different organizations that are out there, that there's a sense of awareness that there are people who do help, who can help, and you can help them help others. And, whether that be, like I said, there's just all sorts of different shades around there. It'll be interesting to see, I think, and this is what I would, anybody that's listening to this, I think, the one thing that I would also prepare my heart for is, during this time, if you're taking care of yourself, you're doing this other stuff, maybe get ready to help others somehow when you can do that. Prepare yourself for that, because whether you're a person of faith or whether that's not something that's on your particular menu, you are a human being, and there's lots of human need that's going to be pouring down the road for us. As much as $1,200 stimulus check will be delightful for some folks, for other folks, they may not get that for circumstances. They may not see that money because they have this well of debt that's so enormous that that won't be any solution at all. So how do we continue to feed? How do we continue to welcome people into our community that they can grow and become who they need to be? Because that's what we do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think just generally as a community, we have, again, I'm not going to say this is everybody, but I think there is a good infrastructure and a good mindset in place that people can be generous of their time and their resources to make life better for other people, which on a lot of levels is those things that we are called to as people of faith. But, as we do those things together, to keep your eyes open, because there will be something that will be out there, I think, that has your name on it. Whether that's making a $5 donation to a food shelf, or whether that's spending time packing groceries at Midwest Food Bank, or whether that's serving at one of the missions in town, or whether that's just giving somebody, if you're a landlord, giving somebody some grace and making a payment on their rent, or whatever it happens to be. There are just lots of ways to do that. And I think the key for coming out on the other side of this as a stronger community is to say that we do this while we may not all have similar circumstances. We know what it's like. And then going back to this thing about scripture, how that relates to each other, not everybody's going through the same thing together. Like you said, you have your two groups. You have the people who are like, I'm going crazy, I have nothing to do, or I'm going crazy, I have so much to do with my family, my job, and everything else, and every mix in between there. So how do we treat each other as humanely as possible? And as a Christian, I have certain perspectives on that as well. But I think just keeping your eyes open, because there are lots of really good groups that are out there. And I've had a couple of phone calls from people in the community, and even from some friends of mine, out in different corners of the world saying, they want to help because they have resources, in one case financial, in the other case physical needs, that they can help people with. And so I'm, how can we help one another help one another?
Yeah. 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 I've heard it remarked before that the harsher winters people are used to, the better they are just enduring things. So like the further north you're from, and you're coming from Minnesota and Wisconsin, right? So you know what I'm talking
Right?
about.
Yep.
So I think all Midwesterners are we're pretty good at just buckling down and enduring because we're used to those, well, okay, it's December and it's not going to be nice until February, and I can be as grumpy as I want about it, but it's nothing I can do about it. So just move on.
True fact.
And I can see us going into that mode with this, but I think to your point, we need to realize this isn't a snowstorm. This is still a place where we, like hunkering down and withdrawing is not. I mean, sorry, drawing in is not necessarily the best approach. There's still community to be formed in different ways throughout this, and to try to still be out there and doing the good that you can do, right?
Yep.
With
Yep.
things, but
And I think one other thing that just kind of come to mind too that I've noticed through this is, there's a movement on Facebook. I think it's called the World of Hearts or whatever, and they do the hearts and the sidewalk talk. It's been a great experience to see some of that sort of stuff. But people learning to appreciate the gifts that they have, and even the gifts that their neighbors have. Whether they be doctors or nurses, or this is one of the interesting things is I saw a post from a doctor friend of mine, and it was a fairly long thing. He started out, he says, please don't reblog this. I don't want this to become a thing. But he says, but I want you guys to pay attention to the people that help the hospitals run. He said, our custodial staff, our food service workers, the people who clean up the rooms, sometimes those are the people who are at the greatest risk of all because they're coming in afterwards, cleaning up this very sloppy situation sometimes, and they don't get paid big bucks, and they're not glamorous positions, and nobody's thinking of them. And I think if nothing else, this idea of what an essential worker is, well, we're all essential workers on some levels. So if you learn to appreciate the fact that we all bring differing gifts into the community to share with one another, from the most glamorous position to the most hands-on kind of stuff, that's out there, and everywhere in between, you value people for the gifts that they bring, not one more than another, but that they are all important as a community. So that's one of the things I kind of see come out of this thing too, is how we revalue some of our the things that are really important.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, appreciate you spending your time chatting with me. Like you mentioned, you're very busy, so I appreciate the hour here. Went quick. It always goes quicker than I thought. I always thought 20, 30 minutes will be fine, but then once you get into it, it's just I like talking to people. So if anyone wants to hear these, see the worship activities and sermons that we were talking about, those are on YouTube still, right?
Yep, YouTube and Facebook. So either one, you could either go to St. John's Bloomington on, if you Google that or if you put that in Facebook, it should take you to our page. Or if you just plain old Google St. John's Bloomington YouTube videos, or go onto YouTube, and you should be able to find our channel on there.
Yeah. Well, I'd encourage everyone, if they've got some time, to go and check that out. It's been, as I mentioned, something that's been very impactful and helpful to me during this time. So Pastor Dave, thanks for stopping by.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yep. Just want to say one more thing. It's a podcast, so I got to thank sponsors. So I thank our three sponsors here. Play Normal Esports is closed down for the time being, hoping they open back up soon. But Normal Gadgets is still available to fix your stuff. I don't think they fix guitars, but like any kind of electrical appliances, phones. They also are offering deep cleanings of phones. So, you probably, if there's COVID on anything, it's going to be on your phone. So bring that in there, get that all sprayed off clean, and they'll teach you how to do some tips to clean it out yourself too. So that's a really good deal. And then BRE Law is also available for your legal needs. Those don't stop in in a pandemic, and they're still available to help you out. So if you got a problem, you need to talk to someone about it, give BRE Law a call. They'll direct you to one of their lawyers. All right. Well, thanks again. Good luck. God bless.
Thanks a lot. You too.
Bye.